Lindsey, and I'll be talking about the soil and crop impacts of grazing an oat cover crop following corn silage and high moisture corn. Just a little bit of background on the research site. It was located in eastern Nebraska near Mead on silt loam, loam, and sandy loam soils with about 3 to 4% soil organic matter. It's a corn soybean rotation. Half of the corn is harvested as high moisture corn. About mid-September it's harvested, and then half of the corn is harvested as corn silage at the beginning of September. It's managed under no tillage, 2 center pivots, and there's 6 treatments in both a western and eastern field. So here's our eastern field, and then here's our western field, and each of those fields have these 6 treatments. The control with no cover crop, no graze, and then the cover crop, no graze, and then cover crop grazed. The oats were drilled at 96 pounds per acre, and then all the treatments, regardless of whether they had a cover crop or not, received 40 pounds of nitrogen per acre. Here's just a quick rundown of the stocking rates. Callie will go more in detail into this, but I just wanted to point out that the eastern field was only grazed twice during this experiment, and then the western field was grazed 3 times during this experiment. Going into the corn and soybean yields, there was no impact from grazing cover crop on yields. There was a small impact of the presence of the oat cover crop on yields in the western field. There was no impact from the cover crop on the eastern field, but following the first period of cover crops in the western field, there was a decrease in soybeans by about 10 bushels per acre under the silage treatment. And then following soybean harvest into silage harvest the next year, the 3rd year, there was a decrease in corn silage due to the cover crop, about 0.5 ton per acre. But then the following year, in the 4th year, there was no impact of the presence of the cover crop. So the cover crop did initially decrease yields in the western field, but there was no impact of the cover crop in the eastern field or the following years of the western field. So here's kind of what the plots look like in June when we were out soil sampling. Here's the control silage plot and a high moisture corn plot. Looking at residue cover, again, this was measured in early June. We've got silage treatments in orange, the grain treatments in yellow. The treatments are down here on the x-axis. Then these lines above, we've got the means, and these bars, these lines with standard deviation, how much the values deviate from the mean. And then these letters show significance or not. So if the letters are different, there's a significant difference. If they're the same, there's not a difference. So, I mean, no surprise, corn silage harvest removes most all the above ground biomass. So it's significantly reduced residue cover in both the eastern field and the western field. What's of interest though is where the silage had the oat cover crop, there was an increase in residue cover for the western field. This was not observed in the eastern field. When we went to measure this in June, we could not see any residue from the cover crop. But in the western field, when we sampled, we did see that residue, and you'll see that bump in residue cover from the cover crop. You'll see that grazing did decrease this bump that we got from the cover crop, but it didn't decrease it any lower than the control with no cover crop. So here's what that looked like in June, what we were looking at when we were taking that measurement. Here's the silage with no cover, the silage with the cover crop that wasn't grazed, and then the grazed cover crop. Sort of on the flip side, here's wind erodible fraction, potential for wind erosion. So the larger the bar means more potential for wind erosion. So you can see, of course, silage with no residue cover significantly increases your wind erosion potential. Again, where we saw the cover crop in the June, you can see there's a slight decrease from the presence of that cover crop, but nothing major. So all in all, at least in June, when the cover crop's kind of dead and not really there anymore, you don't have a big impact from the cover crop on wind erosion, at least in June. Although here's what the fields would have looked like in December. Yeah, your soil can still get dry and it can get pretty windy in the winter. So there could have been possible benefits from the cover crop in terms of wind erosion here in the winter, but we did not see those benefits, considering this is a winter kill cover crop and not much of it was left when we sampled in June. Going on to soil water corn silage significantly decreased soil water in both the east and western field. Bare soil, no residue cover, so you're gonna have a lot of evaporation, lose some soil water. The cover crop did tend to increase soil water in the eastern field, nothing major, just a little bit of an increase where the cover crop is present in the field. And then grazing, although it reduces a little bit of residue in the field, it has no impact on soil water. We also measured water infiltration. The way we do that is we pound this metal ring into the ground, and then we pour water into it. And we measure how quickly the water infiltrates into the soil. So here's the results here. You can see nothing significant, but you can see a definite trend of where the cover crop is present. There's an increase in soil water infiltration. You can see here that grazing did reduce this positive benefit from the cover crop, sort of cancel it out. But again, it did not decrease infiltration anything less than the control. So the presence of cover crops did tend to increase their infiltration rate. For soil compaction, grazing had no impact on soil compaction. The oat cover crop didn't have any impact either, besides somewhat of a trend for reduced compaction, possibly because of the cover crop roots alleviating compaction. Although the corn silage did significant increase soil compaction. You can see here, no cover on the soil. You move more equipment there for corn silage harvest, so you've got more heavy machinery compacting the soil, no residue to sort of buffer it. You can see there's a little bit of wind erosion in this middle channel, kind of destroying the structure, just makes it more susceptible to compaction. Another factor that could have played into compaction is that silage did decrease soil organic matter by about 0.25% in the east field and 0.37% in the west field. Soil organic matter can buffer against compaction, so that may have also played into it. This is at the 0 to 8 inches depth. Cover crop had no impact on soil organic matter. Kelly's going to talk a little bit about how much biomass we got from this cover crop, but since it was winter kill, we didn't get a ton of biomass from this cover crop, so it's not surprising that it didn't really have any impact on soil organic matter. And grazing also had no impact on soil organic matter. Sort of on the flip side, soil microbes, we used a test called FAME, fatty acid methyl ester. Basically, we're extracting the soil microbes from the soil, and you can pretty much, there's biomarkers, sort of like every microbe has a fingerprint, that then we can tell how much microbial life is in the soil. So soil biology was lower under silage harvest, which makes sense. They feed on this soil organic matter, so since silage decreased soil organic matter, it also decreased soil biology. There was an enhancement in soil biology where the cover crop was planted. Even though we can't still see much of the above ground biomass from the cover crop, there's still that root biomass that the soil biology can feed on. So we did see an enhancement from the cover crop in soil biology. And once again, similar to soil organic matter, grazing had no impact on soil microbiology. So just a quick summary here, the grazing cover crop had little to no impact. It did sort of cancel out the increase that we got from the cover crop and soil water infiltration, but nothing major and no impact on yields. The cover crop did have some positive benefits for soil water and infiltration of microbes. And it did have that initial decrease in yields in the western field, but it had no impact in the long term in the western field and no impact at all in the eastern field. And then while corn silage did have numerous negative benefits to soil properties, none of this was reflected in the subsequent soybean yields. It's 3 to 4% soil organic matter. It's pretty high. It's pretty good, deep lush soil. So it's possible if this field was continually managed under corn silage harvest, you could see some negative yield impacts, but the soil is pretty resilient. So we did not see any impacts on soybean yields. And we didn't really see much for the cover crop. Mostly this was just because we didn't get a lot of biomass since this is a winter kill cover crop. Sabrina will talk a little bit more about winter hardy species and their soil impacts. But now I'm gonna hand it over to Callie, and she's gonna talk about the economics and cattle portion. Thank you.